What up, nerds? Welcome to episode 10 of Powerful, a power metal podcast. This is Fourgates, and I am here with my friend LarryBiscuit.
Hello.
Today, we sent our friends ZeldaFan355 and Darko deep into Middle-earth to spend a lovely evening speaking with some residents and experts on all things Tolkien-related. Edledhron from last episode, and also Hansi Kürsch from Blind Guardian. Have you ever wondered why time stood still on the Iron Hill? And what's the deal with Mirror, Mirror on the Wall? Do Balrogs have wings? Do you know, Larry?
I hear they do have wings from a very credible source named Edledhron
Really?
or whatever.
You mean the Lord of the Rings films?
Yes, actually. Peter Jackson
Yeah.
is probably the most credible source that we have for all things Tolkien related.
Yeah, and what's the deal with Lammoth?
Lammoth's pretty cool. I hear it's about a lady who's really sad. But we'll find out.
Well, she sounds pretty upset on Nightfall in Middle-earth.
We'll find out from the experts themselves, Hansi and Ed, in just a little bit.
Yeah, anyway, that's why we are going to introduce this episode where our friends get into the deepest lore of Tolkien and the Silmarillion and get a behind-the-scenes view of Nightfall in Middle-earth. So come join us by the campfire, sit back, relax, and enjoy our episode, Tolkien Talk, An Evening in Middle-earth.
Yeah, may I start?
Sure.
Well, I'm Hansi Kürsch, vocalist of Blind Guardian. We did an album called Nightfall in Middle-earth, which is inspired by the Silmarillion, and that might be the main reason for me to be here tonight.
That's exactly it. Because as we've been saying in previous episodes a lot, we've been planning on doing an episode on Tolkien, on power metal music, and being like the cornerstone of that album. We're really glad to have you with us today here.
Yeah, it's a pleasure for me, man.
So here joining us we're also with ZeldaFan and our resident expert, Edledhron. I hope I said that correctly.
Hello, this is Edledhron. I'm our resident Tolkien expert, and it's great to have you here, Hansi.
Great to be here.
Yep, and hello everyone, this is ZF. I'm sort of like a middling Tolkien fan, I guess. Not an expert, but I've dabbled into the deeper stuff, so hopefully I can serve as a good middle ground between everyone.
Yeah.
And it's amazing to have Hansi here speaking with us about a bunch of nerdy stuff.
Yeah, I consider that to be my nerdy Sunday.
Beautiful.
So I'd say let's let Ed lead us on this. Where should we start?
So let's start at the beginning. Tolkien was a Oxford professor with an interest in fictional constructed languages and fairy tales. And this led him to writing the story called The Hobbit, which was published in 1937. And, it got a good amount of attention from publishers and the public. And, there was this demand for a sequel, which, Tolkien had this other mythology that he had been building up called the Silmarillion. But the publisher wasn't really interested in that. It was too far out there. So, in the mid-50s, Tolkien publishes Lord of the Rings. And this turns out to be, like, an even bigger hit than The Hobbit. You got Tolkien societies popping up, and, really the big group is the hippies. Tolkien wasn't too fond of this hippie connection with Lord of the Rings, but it was there for better or worse. And, what else was popular with hippies was rock music. So you get this sort of early rise of Tolkien influence in popular culture with bands like Led Zeppelin, later on Rush. I think even Black Sabbath had a Tolkien influence song. So I'm just wondering, Hansi, what was your exposure to sort of this early Tolkien music? Did that have much of an influence on your letter choices, or was it just your own love of Tolkien which led to your early Tolkien songs?
Well, when I started doing music, I was not really, referring to Tolkien as a musician, or, I didn't even consider that. When we started writing songs for our band Lucifer's Heritage, there was no Tolkien-related topic. But when we got closer, to become professional, I recommended the book The Lord of the Rings to Andre, our guitarist. Yeah. And all of a sudden, that changed his perspective on things. He just loved the Lord of the Rings story, and he later on loved The Hobbit as well. And he recommended, doing one particular song for this topic. And that was when we started working on a song called Majesty, who appeared as the first song on our first album, Battalions of Fear. That was our first reference to Tolkien. And ever since that moment, especially in the beginning of Blind Guardian's band career, we had a lot of songs which had a sort of narrative, Tolkienish approach already. Yeah. And then it turned obvious that we mingled in some Tolkien-inspired lyrics. By that, we also figured that a lot of the stuff we've made had that fantasy, mystery, horror literature approach. And then we continued doing so. And, I got deeper and deeper into the subject, and my perspective on lyrical creations changed over the years a bit, but that sensation for these topics never disappeared. So we from time to time abuse these topics at points again. But I'm always curious to hear that Black Sabbath has had a song influenced by Tolkien, because I never figured that.
Yeah, apparently that song is The Wizard, which was kind of about Gandalf. I looked at the lyrics and it doesn't seem too Tolkien related, but you definitely see that influence there.
Yeah, I listened to it immediately before we jumped on the call. It's more just generic wizard. It's kind of hard to say it's exactly Gandalf, but sure, why not?
Yeah, like in The Wizard of Uriah Heep, which we covered, it's the same. It's not necessarily Gandalf, but that sort of wizard, which also, could be Merlin. So I was just curious to find out. But the particular Tolkien songs, I would refer to would be the hippie stuff, as you mentioned, or, the more progressive bands like Rush, when they did Necromancer or Rivendell. Or what was it? Led Zeppelin, The Battle of Evermore, of course. That has a strong influence. But I considered myself to be something in between a hippie and a punk. When I was a young kid. So that also fitted, and that might be the root of my Tolkienish inspiration, even though he may have disliked that.
Yeah, it's definitely great to hear that he had that impact on you. I think definitely had that sort of impact with a lot of people, even if most people don't turn out to writing lyrics for metal songs. But when we were planning this episode, Fernando was looking to, the Silmarillion and how that related to Nightfall in the Earth. And, he was listening to the audiobook of Silmarillion, and he had quite a strong reaction, I think, to the Ainur, or the music of the Ainur. Darko, do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. So as I say, I'm the least knowledgeable here, and as Ed just mentioned, I just started listening to this audiobook of the Silmarillion last week. So I think I'd rather read it, but just this first part about the songs, about Iluvatar and the Ainur and all these things, I found it the idea of singing and creating a theme that then all the Ainurs have to harmonize and embellish by themselves, and how that kind of is the creation of the world, the way it's written. And I find it really, really inspirational. It just got my mind thinking into, I should start making some music right now. I find it really not even going into everything else, but just the way that it's written. It just feels so nice to say, okay, so this is the history of the world, and it is what it is because it's this song that is weaved together between all these different voices, that without all the voices, the concept was there, but because it is interpreted, because it's sung by the other ones, and that it's harmonized and everything, that's when it comes to be, actually. Mm-hmm. And then further into that, how the one dude that wants to do his own thing, yeah, creates all these harmonies and stuff around. I find it great. Like any musician that listens or reads this, it really fires you to, okay, I should start doing stuff like this and writing songs.
I mean, over the years, I've seen a lot of strong reactions to the Ainur delay, and I mean, a lot of people think that's the most beautiful creation myth that, you know, a culture or someone has put forth. But I mean, I haven't really thought of it as, you know, from the perspective of a musician, sort of what influence that might have.
In my case, it has had a big influence, of course. It's a little bit like the Genesis in the Old Testament. Mm-hmm. Certainly can be seen as a definite inspiration. And, you know, if you look at it in its complexity, it's also like, you know, a reference to each piece of music which can be invented. Because you, as a musician, start at point zero, and you might have an idea, and you might listen to a melody in yourself, but I barely ever have a complete picture, you know, of, you know, how a song finally will evolve. That is something happening later. So I can easily refer to the music of the Ainur. I said, as a creator, you may have the full picture in mind, but in that particular sense, I believe that I or Blind Guardian in general, we are more like the Ainur, because we're usually writing songs in a team constellation, and as mentioned, there is a hidden melody deep within, and it just needs to be delivered at a certain point.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And that's definitely how the music of the Ainur plays out, where, you know, they each basically play their own song by themselves, and everyone's sort of listening in and, you know, sort of building a better understanding. And that plays up to where, you know, they're able to play later on these big, glorious themes. And, you know, Melkor's doing his own thing, but even that's taken into the main music to enhance it. It becomes better over time as every piece builds up, every piece understands more of each other.
Right. This even gives more justification to Blind Guardian, because, you know, we have the involvement of disharmonies or harsher interruptions, which makes sense in the complex achievement of a song, but is not necessarily something which a listener would consider nicely, you know, if it would outstand too much. But, you know, within the whole creation, it delivers a beauty, you know, which you just can receive by, you know, putting in dark, evil, and most beautiful elements at the same time.
What is light without some shade contrasting it?
Yeah. I thought an interesting part of that chapter was when they had Iluvatar sort of stand back up and create like new themes that the Ainur couldn't even like conceive of, to sort of overpower what Melkor was doing and tie it all back together.
True. In this sense, I would say Iluvatar is more like a producer than a musician, you know. He brings himself in when it's absolutely necessary, so things cannot get completely out of hand. I mean, he considers this to be his task. So that is also why I'm referring more to the Ainur than to Iluvatar when I'm talking about, you know, musicians. But the Iluvatar aspect in there is very strong, and, you know, it really picturizes the whole story. I mean, the strong thing about Tolkien is that, you know, melodies and pictures, images pop up in your mind immediately, and they might be different from person to person, but I'm pretty sure, you know, for a good amount of people, that is the case. You know, they read that stuff, and it helps creating new images, or improves their own imaginations. It is the source of inspiration.
I was actually listening to another podcast on Tolkien a while ago, and Tolkien had this concept of subcreation, where you have God the creator, whose authority must be respected, but then within that creation, Iluvatar gives free rein to subcreate, to enhance the overall work. And what the guest on this podcast brought up was the idea of sub-subcreation, where you have creation, then you have Tolkien subcreation, then you have people working within Tolkien's subcreation. And it's sort of this interesting play on one of Tolkien's ideas for his work, and applying that to how people have taken influence from it.
Most certainly. I would agree on that. Whatever, happens in this universe can have an influence, and, needs to be considered individual. But in total, people need to create, you can be inspired by something, but you will have to bring your own spirit in at a certain point. That's the important point.
Definitely. So, as that conversation hinted at, we're digging deep into a book called The Silmarillion by J.R. Tolkien. And Nightfall in Middle-earth is an album which was very much inspired by The Silmarillion. Basically goes, across the songs, it goes across the various chapters, telling most of his story. I was just wondering, Hansi, how did you go about actually adapting The Silmarillion into, a metal rock opera album? Were you looking at favorite chapters, or were you looking to tell the complete story? Just sort of what was your process on that?
Well, we first felt that the music which we came up with at that point of the decision, it might have been 4 or 5 songs. They all spoke a certain language, which went into one direction. At that point, we could not exactly judge into which direction that would be. So I start chasing for inspiration and stories which probably would fit. And I came up with 3 different suggestions. One was the Silmarillion. Another one was inspired by a German mythologic topic called the Saga of Rheingold, which is quite popular as well. And then, of course, because I was pretty much into it at that time, the Arthurian epic and, a storyboard about Merlin the sorcerer. I mentioned that to my band colleagues, and even though they did not know the Silmarillion at that time, they figured my passion for the story, and they picturized the songs in connection with pieces of the story. I explained to them, and that made us go for Nightfall in Middle-earth. And when the Silmarillion, I'm sorry, when doing so, I needed to find the right spot in the story, to be featured on the album, because it was obvious that the Silmarillion is such a gigantic story, it would never ever fit completely. So I was obviously searching for the most interesting part of the story, at least the most interesting part for me, and that has been the Flight of the Noldor. The story, of course, also has a good amount of similarities to The Lord of the Rings, which made it easier to comprehend for my bandmates, and I assumed it would have been easier for the listener as well, to just follow a storyboard related to that particular part of the story. And I think it makes the access easier to the story. But I also feel that this is the part with where the strongest characters and the most storytelling is going on. I was thrilled by characters such as Fëanor or Fingolfin, and they made it easier to compose songs afterwards, because, as mentioned, at that point we had 4 or 5 songs, and they spoke that fantasy-like language, but we needed to continue later on, and that in a even stronger Tolkien direction. So it was good to have such strong characters, and it helped composing for sure.
Yeah, I mean, the earlier part of the Silmarillion with Five Noldor is definitely a favorite of mine as well. And a big part of that is definitely, the passion from Fëanor, as he leads, this exodus of the Noldor back into Middle-earth, on this quest of vengeance. And I mean, I just gotta say that your songs perfectly capture that tone. So I think it's definitely a good choice to focus on that early part.
And one of the important bits that comes up a lot in that album, and I think is one of the key parts of the Silmarillion, is that first kinslaying of Fëanor and the Noldor, killing is it the Teleri? Is that how you say it?
Yeah, the Teleri. The
Teleri elves to steal their ships and hightail it back to Middle-earth in pursuit of Morgoth. And really focusing on that and the curse that's placed on them, the oath that Fëanor and his sons swear. It's powerful stuff, and it's easy to see how you want to make an album about it.
Yeah, doing stuff for the music of the Ainur, for example, that in my perspective, and I'm a vocalist, that needed to be instrumental and choral-like and maybe classical. Therefore, I thought, well, that would not fit. We may do a song in the future, which refers to such music, and then there might be a little singing, maybe even without words, just, whatever comes into my mind then. But it would not have fitted. And the same can be said about other parts, like the Vala Quenta. That would have been so much more difficult, even, to keep up the excitement. But here, when talking about the Flight of the Noldor, you have a sort of screenplay in front of you. Of course, it's loosely written, and there is a chronological order, and there partly is a sort of storytelling, and you can figure that it is a gathering of different myths and different, perceptions, that might have been even Tolkien's intention, but still it is very compact. And so I felt it more easy to, follow that line. But even then, it was difficult to get that from one point to the other point. We luckily started with the War of Wrath, so we had the finishing in the beginning and did not have to take care on that too much. But other than that, it was a struggle for me to get through the story to a certain point, so it would make sense. And even then, I left out some stuff which might have been, worth to be mentioned or to be digged in a little more carefully and more deeper. But as you said, I mean, Fëanor, for example, he reveals so many different facets in terms of being, such a smart ass on one hand. On the other hand, he can be a rude, unfair guy, and
definitely.
From that point on, I also like the Noldor so much because they have a certain human approach, and that was something which helped me not only understanding the story a little more, but also filling it with life. Then on the other hand, you have a character like Fingolfin, which is the most shining hero you can imagine, and of course, I mean that opens universes for me as a vocalist, but also for a songwriter like Andre, for example. And we all in the band have the passion, to somehow bring that into a musical piece which creates imaginations in the people again.
Yeah, I mean, the Silmarillion was, a work that can be described as unfinished, because Tolkien himself never published the work in a completed form. And as a result, you sort of have different drafts and texts lying around, and different things happen in those texts. And in one of the later writings called the Shibboleth of Fëanor, one of Fëanor's sons, called Amrod, is actually burned in the ships that CF mentioned earlier before. And this wasn't something that Christopher Tolkien brought into the Silmarillion that he published. So it's been interesting to see, what impact that might have had on Night from the Earth if that detail is included, because that is one facet of Fëanor that could be covered.
Yeah, I mean, there was so much stuff, and I I digged into many stories and many aspects of that story. So if every input was valuable, and whatever I could have gotten in addition would have made a difference for sure.
I mean, you're really taking this dense material and condensing it down to 4 to 6 minute songs, where you only have so many verses, so many courses you can go through. I imagine it must have been really difficult to take Silmarillion, which is this big dense text, and cram it into that space, and get a result that's comprehensible out of that.
Well, you have to go with the flow. If if you have an idea, and I need to force myself to look into one direction, and then ignore others, and then things become fairly logical and doable at the same time.
Yeah, definitely.
I'm really amazed at everything that I'm hearing.
Yeah, this is definitely a great conversation.
This is really, really interesting. I need to read all this stuff.
It's definitely a book worth reading.
Yeah, definitely.
One of the things I'm really interested in learning about is how you guys went about choosing when you had certain ideas for the stories or the portions of the Silmarillion you wanted to cover, and how you decided how you wanted to fit that into the music. Like Beren and Luthien get a very metal song with When Sorrow Sang, and then Turin and the huge tragedy that he goes through gets the ballad with Harvest of Sorrow. Well,
if you relate to these two pieces, I mean, I would go for Harvest of Sorrow first, and to Turin, of course, then. I think it fitted so beautifully because I honestly haven't even thought about that. When the music popped up, it was clear to me that this would be a strong song for Turin because he's such a tragic character, and his story is, so intense. There was not a lot of doubts in me that this would fit. Plus, I had that tragic love story, which fitted the music so well. So that was fairly easy. More surprising might be When Sorrow Sang and Beren and Luthien, because it's a very intense song. Maybe maybe the Curse of Feanor is even a little more intense, but When Sorrow Sang is intense, no doubt about that. But they basically got a second spot in Out on the Water, which probably is more suitable for them at a first glimpse. If I relate to the tragic loss which Luthien has experienced, I feel that there must have been anger and aggression, at least in herself. So her inner voice might have been, different to what she revealed to Mandos when singing in front of him. And that was, my key holder for still thinking that this would be a good idea to have that at that particular spot. And for most cases, we tried to follow the story in a chronological order whenever it was possible. And at that point, we are getting closer to the end of the album there. It was absolutely necessary to have something as intense. So there wasn't much choice on the other side.
And it is definitely a very intense moment in the story when, you have this very stoic god being moved to only the first time in all of his history, being moved to pity.
Yeah.
It's just this epic, song of the history of men and elves and all the sorrow they've gone through. So the emotion's definitely there. And that's another point with this album where, taking this album out into, sort of the more Tolkien circle versus the metal circle, I've noticed some, hesitance towards it because, first off, they might not be into metal, so that's sort of a hurdle to get over. But also, sort of this view that I've seen is that Tolkien and metal, might not be the best fit for some people. I think the view there is sort of like that, electric guitars and stuff, like, it's totally alien to Middle-earth compared to, like, horns or strings. But I think, what you can really do with music is capture mood, you can capture feelings and tones like we've been talking about. And that's where I think, Nightfall Middle-earth really shines in capturing, like, Feanor's, wrath and intensity of Lúthien's emotions.
One of the key things that I've really liked is in the song Time Stands Still, it's this big epic battle, this beacon of hope that Fingolfin is riding alone against, basically the closest thing they have to the devil. And it captures this feeling of inspiration, of tragedy, aggression. Tolkien wrote about these huge epic battles. Like, it's kind of hard to think that he's not just like a nerd that's into this stuff. And metal and power metal in particular just fits that so well. So it's alien in one sense, but it fits perfectly in another. When I saw you guys perform Time Stands Still live, I don't think I felt ever more like I was in such like the middle of that giant battle. I think it fit perfectly.
Thanks. And it is my favorite song, not only on the album, but for Blind Guardian music in general. And in general, I think we put a lot of energy into this album. It's almost like, Feanor, who created his Silmarils at a certain point prior to the flight of the Noldor. But when we finished that album, I felt that all energy was gone. so I could relate to Feanor in a lot of matters. And I believe it might have been the case that Tolkien would not necessarily like heavy metal because some of the narrations he does, they refer more to classical music, to maybe medieval music, maybe church music. But as mentioned in the beginning, when seeing how Melkor weaves in his topics and, how he brings in a darker intensity, yeah. I personally think that metal in general and rock in general perfectly well suits the Tolkien music and the result, not only of the Battle of Evermore, but of some other songs as well, really pays tribute and justifies artists who still do music, no matter if Tolkien would have liked it or not. I mean, I have to express myself and I have to create whatever comes out of me. And, I'm doing that with a full respect of another artist if I'm inspired by another artist. But, I can't take back everything just because, of the anxiety that someone might not like it, like Tolkien did it with his writing. He reveals his soul and his heart to everyone. And I know that he has been afraid, that the soul can be destroyed or the heart can be broken. And that obviously is the same with every musician, revealing his heart and his soul to music. But it needs to be expressed and it needs to be revealed, no matter what the result might be.
And you definitely need to separate, the art and the artist. And, really with Tolkien, if you read his letters, other people had approached him about, working off of his stories. And, sometimes he'd be critical of it, but he was always very humble that other people would be so moved by his stories that, they'd want to go off and create their own works of art. So I think he definitely have some appreciation there, even if he wasn't, even if he couldn't be himself, into metal. Yeah,
I would guess so. Because, I always feel pleased if I see, someone is inspired by Blind Guardian. And no matter in which direction he or she is conducting him or herself, it is a big honor. And what I feel, not only in the music of the Ainur, but with regard to Tolkien in general, that he... more than anything else, appreciates the freedom, the freedom of speech, the freedom of, individual thinking and individual art as well. He probably has more problems if you start analyzing his stuff and, drive it into certain direction, like, he is referring to this or he is referring to that, while he most probably just wanted to tell a great story. He created his own universe. He was a genius linguist, and he did his own thing. That was, I think, his main passion.
Definitely. I mean, freedom and free will are definitely big themes in his work. I mean, really, evil in his stories is defined by, dominating wills and, saying you have to do it this way, you can't do it the other way. Sauron, basically started his descent into evil by saying, well, I think everything would be better if we just did this.
For sure. Yeah, I mean, with that regard, it's, it's not exactly like in the Bible, but, if you look at it, free will comes in by the evil creatures there at times. Like, Lucifer is the one who questions things. And Melkor basically is doing the same thing in the music of the Ainur.
Yeah, he wants to be his own creator, and, that's not really an evil goal in itself. It's more how he went about it.
Yeah. I mean, you probably do not accept authorities. then you come up with your own stuff, of course.
Right. His music was discordant, or he would pervert the creations of everyone else.
Well, yeah. A discord here and there is not the worst.
Yeah, so sometimes that's just the spice that you need to complete a thing.
Exactly, If food is not hot and spicy, we all know.
And this links back to the Ainur, where, one of Various points is that, you need variety, and variety enhances everything else.
True.
Mm-hmm. So I'm just curious. Silmarillion is told, from a mythological perspective. It's not really a dramatic work. Nightfall and Earth, the lyrics are very, from the perspective of characters. Can you just talk a little bit about your process and, how you thought about putting yourself, as the lyricist into the position of these characters and what impact that might have had?
Well, when singing, of course, I try to switch into, different characters, no matter if it is on the Nightfall album or on any other album, it always reveals a little bit of my different me's, to say so. What I can do best is, I think, and that is why you mentioned the Curse of Fëanor before, is expressing anger in a convincing way. And of course, that is where I try to pick up my most favorite characters. When these characters are most angry? When do they reach the saddest point? In a story where I can capture them. How can I, capture someone who is probably featured in a certain way throughout the whole story, but try to reveal something which might show a different perspective of this side. I'm referring to what was his name? Medros, the guy I refer to in Blood Tears.
Yeah.
He's not the nicest person, but he is humiliated and he's in a desperate situation, and I try to capture that and just bring that into the most suitable way our music allows it. Or then a person like Maglor, for example, who was a key character for me for the whole story, because that's how I was able to bring in my perspective of the story by another musician, which was very important. And Maglor is mainly the one who's singing in Nightfall. He knows about the failures, but he cannot change what they have done, and he as every Noldor, he's bounded to the curse. So whether he may have good aspects or not, he has to carry his burden, and I try to reveal something like that. And this is how I relate it, not only to Nightfall, but to every song. For instance, when we go to Into the Storm, you're listening to how do you call that? A hungry Ungoliante. I don't know how you would.
Ungoliant.
How do you say it?
Ungoliant or Ungoliante.
Ungoliant, okay. We would say Ungoliante. But Ungoliant would do too. I do not even know if she does a lot of talking in the story. And when listening to her, there is my reference to Gollum, of course. That would have been a spot if that was a Lord of the Rings inspired album. That would have been my spot for Gollum, for sure. And on the other side, this is where you get Morgoth in the most disparate situation, and I try to capture that at the same time. Then we have a song like The Elder, for example, and there's not only the need to fit in Felagund, because I need the how can I say that, the introduction for Baron and Luthien. But I also have that deeply tragic, sad, melodic song, which just reveals in its own the tragedy of a Noldor dying, by sacrificing himself, to say so. And this needs to be delivered in every single word, but also in the performance itself. So I don't know how many times I sang that before we finally found a version we felt was suitable. I did that day after day after day, because such a song I cannot sing, on spot. I did several attempts, and I knew what to do, but you need the magic moment to make that really the song which comforts not only the lyrics but also the topic
and the emotion of the moment. And I think you did a great job there. You brought up Blood Tears earlier, and something I think that's interesting about that song, that moment in the story, is that it's about this war, and there's torture, and it's a very tragic circumstance for Madros. But at the end of the day, it's something that we might not be seeing a lot in this moment in the story, is that ultimately it's about friendship. It's about Fingon wanting to rescue his friend and to some extent repair relations. That's an extra component to the song that I think is definitely worthy of mention.
I believe so too. When we did it, we had a discussion in the band. I remember because some of the band members did not like that song, and it was difficult for them to realize the beauty which was in the song, and to understood what Andre and I had in mind, by doing such a song. But I felt there was a necessity to feature that particular moment in the story in the best possible way, because Blood Tears reveals both the beauty and the disgrace, of the whole story. And it is also featured in Madros as a person, I think.
For sure.
One of the songs I thought was really interesting was Thorn, the one talking about Maeglin and like the fall of Gondor and like the struggles that he went through. Where it's
more
like
about ale. How do you call that? Ale? I don't know.
Ale? Darko?
Yeah, you're right. I mean, the topic is right, but my idea was to get Ale in there, because he's, how do you call that, humiliated and degraded, and not treated equally, but his ambitions are high, and at the very end he is supposed to fail. There is no other option, and I found that very tempting.
Yeah, I mean, Maeglin's story is such an interesting one because, on one hand, he has such tragic circumstances where, his father basically murders his mother in an attempt to kill himself. Well, killed Maglin. And then his father's thrown off a cliff, and he's just raised in a very hostile environment towards him. And then Morgoth comes and tortures him and basically promises him everything that he wants if he betrays his city. So he's done this very evil thing, but at the same time, you have to have some pity for him.
For sure. Yeah, that's what I mean. And this is what I try to bring in Thorn, especially in the beginning. It is obvious, that something mystic and something misery-wise will happen.
Yeah, I love the lyrics, Split Song of Death.
Yeah, that was a lucky coincidence. I don't know, if I should spoil this story, but this lyrical part came in because of one of my ideas, my other conceptual ideas, the one about the Rheingold saga and the Song of Death, and honor plays a very important role there. And when we started working on that song, I was more referring to the Rheingold saga in the beginning than to any story related to Tolkien. And I just felt, well, at that particular point, this part still fits, so I kept it in. And I also think it's not only because of the meaning, but also the way it has been woven in is one of the strongest pieces in that particular song.
In the Rheingold possibility there is kind of interesting because a lot of people have noted that Tolkien himself might take some influence from that story, particularly with the One Ring being a magic ring and sort of this object of all this tragedy. It is kind of interesting that that builds up to the fall of Gondolin, but there isn't actually a song dedicated to the battle itself. Was that a conscious decision on your part, or was there just not enough room? Was there did you just not have a song that fit that?
You already had enough battles.
No, I mean, I was running, out of content in terms of songs, and I needed to make a decision there, and I went this direction. I was really struggling with myself here, also how to end the story. We have, 2 additional songs which did not end up on the album because we were not able to finish them. Mm-hmm. One was Doom, which later on appeared on the Beyond the Red Mirror album. I altered the lyrics a little bit, but when we're going to release the vinyl version of Nightfall in Middle-earth, hopefully at the end of the year, this version with the original lyrics and another song which is called The Tides of War, which also deals with Fëanor and the Teleri and the burning boats, will be featured on this vinyl version. I really had to struggle how to end the story and how to fit in most of the topics as much as possible. Doom, just to end up, takes place right after the 5th battle. So we follow Morgoth a little bit, and this might not be the better ending for the album, but it was at least a chance for me to continue a little bit and get a little more content in there. But here and there pieces were supposed to be left out because simply there was no music anymore.
Yeah, there's definitely so much space you can put on a CD.
That's true. That's true. But the creative output, there was not more. We just had these 60 or 70 minutes of music, which is quite a lot. But
I mean, it sounds like it was quite a struggle in that, even just that. I think I also remember reading in the book that came with the box set that released in 2013. I think you remember mentioning that you couldn't finish the story of the Silmarillion's album. Yeah.
I mean, I always, considered going back and doing Nightfall Middle-earth Part 2, but where to end up then,
Yeah. There's always more with Tolkien.
Yeah. Nightfall even sort of ends on a bit of a downer with the last, I guess, full song being Dark Passage about Hurin just being tortured.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what I do at Doom, you know. I'm extending that a little bit because I felt that was from the man kind of perspective the most intense moment apart from Turin.
And I guess tying into more of like the way the story is told, we talked about embodying some of the characters. Nightfall Middle-earth uses a lot of shorter interludes through it that tie into the concept, and some of which are even voice acted by people that are not you.
Yeah.
I was curious about all that.
Sometimes it's good not to be me. I could not have done that. You know, I wrote down the, whatever it was, monologues, dialogues, and, you know, it took forever. Again, it took away a lot of energy, and I was really running out of idea how to, you know, get that onto the album, because we felt that a little bit of storytelling would be the icing on the cake, but to find such people was quite difficult. We were recording in Denmark, and we needed to have some Shakespeare sort of speaker characters. So by coincidence, I found these two guys, you know. Mainly it was Charlie Bauerfeind, who back then was our engineer, who used to work with one of the two. And, you know, he didn't know exactly if that was what I was looking for. But, you know, he just gave me the number, and I spoke to Norman, the guy who's doing Morgoth, for example. And, you know, just by hearing his voice, I knew all my problems were solved at that moment, because he had such a strong voice, and, you know, it was so beautiful just to hear him speak on the phone. And I had so many other ideas coming up, and I knew, oh, he's a native speaker. So if something in my dialogues or monologues is incorrect, they can even correct it and make it better, and they can, you know, they can make it their own. And so I sent him all the stuff. And he found that other guy, and I don't think that they even rehearsed. They just got my descriptions, how I wanted, you know, the characters to be featured, and then I went to England for an afternoon, and these guys, they just, you know, they smoked it. It was done in 2 or 3 hours, you know, all this stuff.
Oh wow!
When the setting, you know, was completed, they were doing a rehearsal, and the rehearsal was so great that I was completely freaking that the guy, the engineer, probably would not have recorded it. And I was screaming at him, and I said, record it, it's great, I don't need anything else. And he said, yeah, it is recorded, but they go for a second run, and it will be even better. And it was. But you know, I was really cautious, because, you know, I'm believing in magic moments, and I felt that was one. But these guys were totally professional, so it didn't make a difference. I think if they did it twice or 3 times, maybe, but whatever they've done, I was fine after the first already.
That just now sounded like you have created this theme, but you needed someone else to actually perform it, to bring it to its full completion and deliverance, like they were your Ainur.
It always comes back to the Edledhron.
Yeah, I haven't thought about that. Yeah, I played that string in them, right? I taught them pieces of the music, but not everything.
Yeah.
And so they accomplished it, and I was the conductor. But, you know, I figured I was not necessarily needed there. If I did not appear, it would not have made a difference for sure, because they were so professional and they knew what to do. But I have to admit that once I do explain things, you know, in terms of a production situation, I try to be as precise as possible. I've learned that over the years, and it seems that I scratched something in them. So for the very first and maybe last time, no, not for the last time, but for one of the first times, I've been Iluvatar.
Yeah.
it does bring up an interesting point where, you have to think, what does Morgoth sound like? What does Sauron sound like? And so on. And with an album, music, telling a story that way, it leaves much more to the viewer or the listener, much like the book does, where they can imagine things as they please. I think that's one of the strengths of telling a story through the music versus movies or video games or something where the imagery is much more dominated by the director or the actors and such.
Where you have to actually see something.
Yeah, because the visual impact of that's just so dominating.
Yeah, that is true. When making music, that's in general a goal, to visualize things even though they are not there. And that is probably the beauty of the music of Ainur as well. Everyone has a certain understanding about that music, even though it never has been composed, because you just feel that, by the words used, there is music, and this music must sound terrific. There is no doubt about that, and that of course has been our goal. Whenever talking about a concept, you also have to consider how to use effects, like a bridge or or a tower falling down, dragon flying, whatever you want to design. It needs to be done in the most suitable way, and the perception of the listener, depends on his ability to reflect such things for himself. But the more help we can give, the more support we can give, the better it is, of course. And the more precise we are, the better the picture will be.
An album like this definitely benefits from really engaging in the lyrics and the story around it. I think, as Kyle and Fernando have been listening to the album and reading the stories this week in preparation for this, I think they've talked a little about getting sort of something of a newfound appreciation for the album.
Oh yeah, for sure. I was re-listening to Nightfall and looking at the lyrics just last night after having gone through the Silmarillion, and it was just this moment of oh my god, it all makes sense now.
Yeah, but at that point I also depend on the listener to be willing to invest time in investigating Tolkien and the Silmarillion. On the other hand, this music and my lyrics need to strike something in a person, even though this person might not have heard anything about the Silmarillion and is not keen of Tolkien's writing. So that that is the other part of the coin. We're still musicians and we're doing our own thing. So this needs to be delivered as well. I'm struggling with the same at the moment, where we are working on an orchestral project, which we started back with Nightfall in Middle-earth. And some of the music also has a strong Tolkien approach. But it needs to shine even without Tolkien-related topics.
Yeah, and I can say about that I first listened to the album just knowing what it was about, but as I said, I haven't read the Silmarillion or gone in deep on all these things. But I could tell that the album had this story going on with certain characters clearly defined, and I want to say this is one of those concept albums that when they have people just talking and narration, it completely fits the overall mood of the album, and it doesn't feel like everything stopped just for talking and explaining, but it's rather an integral part of it.
Right. You mentioned Out on the Water earlier, sort of just tying in with Beren and Luthien, or the Dark Elf tying in with Thorn. I like those little touches, though.
Thanks.
Yeah, and imagine when you're playing for thousands of people live and you want them to sing along to a chorus. You can't really have this expectation that they're intimately familiar with the Silmarillion. They might not know who Melkor is, but they can sing along to Time Stand Still.
Yeah.
Or even you guys, I think usually end your shows with a big song like Mirror Mirror, which is about the founding of Gondolin. And learning like what the Lord of Water is. When I was learning about the Valar was interesting. I'm like, oh my god, that just those little connections, those little details, really help your understanding of the album, your appreciation for the music. It gets you more into the story. I don't really know what the mirror mirror part is about.
I was expecting that question.
Oh man.
I found in one of the Unfinished Tales stories. I don't know if it was in Unfinished Tales or in one of the other writings. I found a mirror in Gondolin, finally, but it has not been related to that, and it also has not been related to Galadriel's mirror. That was, to spoil the story again, I had these words and I could not get rid of them. They were so magical and they fit into a dream. A mirror, a dream is a mirror of whatever your mind is willing to reveal, or it contains a secrecy. It shows the other side of you. So it still fitted, and we are known for mirrors. So I did not have too many problems with it, but it was an issue for me for a while. I did sing like at least 3 or different choruses there, like there's a shadow on the wall which fitted somehow, but it did not have the same magic. So I certainly at that point regretted it, but the flow of words, the magic of words, which pleased the origin, and that was Mirror Mirror. There was no chance to get away from them, without hurting this particular part of music, and so I kept it in because I thought, well, it's still music, and there's still a lot of space for interpretations, so it does not really hurt the story, and it's still obvious what I'm singing about when what the story is about. But there is no real need for the mirror there.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely room for artistic license, and I mean, like you said, there's absolutely nothing going against the story. There's just your depiction of that moment.
Yeah.
Mirror Mirror was the first Blind Guardian song I heard, however many years ago, and I had no idea it was about like anything Tolkien related. I thought, is this a Snow White thing?
The funny thing is, this piece of the song, and not only the complete arrangement, but the Mirror Mirror on the Wall line, including the rhythm guitars, they have been composed for Imaginations from the Other Side, where they would have made sense completely because we had these mirrors on the album, and it was more about 2 words, lying on the opposite side of one mirror. So they fitted in there, but the part itself did not fit into the music. It was to say so, a leftover of I'm Alive, where we had that intense chorus part, and we thought, well, no, Mirror Mirror is great chorus, but we cannot use it here. So we put that aside for at least 2 or 3 years until we started working seriously on the Nightfall concept, and then I just mentioned to Andre that we still have that beautiful chorus, and he said, yeah, we have to work on that. And that's when we started working on Mirror Mirror, the song.
I mean, it's a great song. It's sort of one of your more popular songs, so I think you definitely did something right there.
Yeah.
Thanks.
For sure.
Yeah, I mean, I believe that Mirror Mirror maybe is not the most mainstreamish, but one of the songs which really captures the attention of any person who's into power speed metal music, because it has that value, that beauty that will amaze people, and as you said, you don't need to know what it is about. I would say that is the case with a lot of the songs, not with all, but like Into the Storm or Time Stands Still, they are standalone songs.
Yeah, I would say that's true for those songs. Like, I really enjoyed them before even paying attention to the actual lyrics. Like, this is great, and I get the concept of the songs and what you're trying to tell with them what feelings are you trying to convey. And then you go look at the lyrics and you say, oh, this is about this thing. And then you go look at that thing and, oh man, now it only got better. It was already great. And now I got all this extra depth to go into and experience it in this way that is even better than before.
You know what? When we did, it was Into the Storm and it was Time Stands Still. They're working titles, even when, Andre didn't know anything about the Silmarillion, and I'm not even sure if we decided to go for the Silmarillion at that point. Into the Storm was called Gollum Speaks, working title when he came up with the first 16 or 32 bars and asked me to come up with melody lines for it, and Time Stands Still was called Frodo Speaks. So you see, I mean, it is all connected.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Back then, we certainly, and sometimes we're still, when doing music, so heavily inspired whatever Tolkien came up with that even if there is no words sung and Andre doesn't even know in which direction my melodies will go, he just, just for the sake of having a title and probably of having an idea of an inspiration, where to drive his own musical direction. He names them like that, and sometimes it's easy to pick up, sometimes it's not.
It's just interesting hearing that because it really contributes to, Tolkien's ability to have this, really unique tone throughout his writings. His style it's one of the big draws for me.
Right. When I've read a decent amount of fantasy, and no one quite has like that poetic or like song-like would be a good way to put it, quality to the way he writes. When I was first reading Return of the King and doing the battle at Pelennor Fields, like it doesn't even feel like a battle. It feels like music in a way.
Oh, it even ends with this big long song at the end, the Song of the Mountains of Moonburg, where it has the Rohirrim basically mourning their dead in a very sort of Norse fashion.
Yeah.
Tolkien certainly liked his songs. There's tons of them throughout The Hobbit and the Lord of the Rings too, and even sprinkled in with the Silmarillion. It just makes sense that his legacy in a way would be inspiration to musicians like yourself.
Oh, for sure. I think one of the strengths, apart from weaving in music, is that he reveals a lot of things by not saying them. Like if Sauron's in the Lord of the Rings, he stays undefined, and you still have. For me, he stays undefined, and you still have a perfect image and a perfect feeling about his size and the thread which goes out from him. Without really finally determining details about him, and this is a quality which Tolkien has. He leaves that to the listener or to the reader. Who therefore, can create his own Sauron.
I mean, it was definitely one of Tolkien's traits that he left so much to the reader, and in the Tolkien fan community, that's led to a lot of lively debates, ranging on everything from Tom Bombadil to, did Sauron have a body or not? Did Balrogs have wings or not? It's really kind of interesting to take.
I would say they have. I would say they have.
Oh my god!
Oh man, that's a can of worms.
that is a big can of worms.
It's artistic, creative interpretation. It's fine.
Yes.
Yeah, don't get upset.
There's nothing in Tolkien that says they don't have wings.
Oh my god, I'm gonna die.
I mean, at least the winged Balrog image, it's definitely a cool monster.
Yeah, I need to look. I just got an artwork from an artist, and there are Balrogs on there, and I think he designed them with wings. That is the reason why I just said, well, they have wings, because I like the image, which the artist came up with. Well, I don't care. I mean,
it's all fantasy.
They are great creatures, and I don't want to meet them.
Yeah, I don't think anyone would. And sorry, they really fill the role of course, torturers. So, not the kind of guys that you want to meet.
Yeah, a number of the characters in the Silmarillion were, just beaten to death by Balrogs.
Yeah, but they get that shit as well, so that's all right.
True.
I have one thing that I just thought about, because right now, first, I'm glad that I'm not the only non-native English speaker in the show today. And
did you recognize?
And I wanted to ask you, when you first read, I don't know, whatever book you read first of this one, did you read translations to German or the English books? Because I'm thinking that some of the songs that are written in the books, that how they might come off different in different translations due to the rhythm and the number of syllables in the words and stuff.
I think to say that first, translations, especially if you're talking about poetic approaches, they might be very accurate, and they try to fit that in almost every language as good as they can. When I started reading Tolkien, it was in German, and I started reading it in the early 80s, I would say. It must have been maybe 82 or 83, I would guess, because I first heard about The Hobbit when I was 14 or 15. It was recommended by me by a guy who I considered to be a nerd, and I was not interested to read The Hobbit back then. But suddenly I found the book in the bookshelf of my sister, who did never recommend it to me. I'm not even sure if she read it herself or if it was, just for school purposes that she was forced to read it. But I saw it there and I read it, and it was a paperback in a quite good translation, I must say, after having read the English version afterwards 2 or 3 times, and I immediately love it. So the translation must have been good, and the story told is pretty much the same you would get in any other language as well. So they had been very careful. Mm-hmm. By knowing how picky Tolkien has been about language and his words. He might not have been satisfied with it. I don't know. He might have lived even at the time this translation has been done. So I'm pretty sure he had a keen eye on it. That's for sure. So when we started songwriting, it was still the same. There was no English version available, and back then there was no internet. It was in the middle of the 80s. Late 80s when we dealt with the first lyrical Tolkien topics for our music. So what I had as a reference was the German version, and that created definitely problems. Like when we did a song called Lord of the Rings in the 90s, I still did not have an English, in the very early 90s, I still did not have an English version. So my English was okay, but, back then I did not pay too much attention, on lyrical correctness or grammar correctness in particular, because my impression, and I believe it was the case, that no one really cared about it, and it was more, the language coming from the heart, which was more important for me. So I did not use a word because I didn't know the word dwarf back then. Or I knew the word, but, I thought gnome or gnome would be more suitable for dwarf. So I used the word gnome instead of dwarf, which I would have used if I knew the English version. And stuff like that happened because, I just, worked with a translation and translated that back with my, mediocre English back then into, the native or the original language. So there must have been accidents, of course. Mm-hmm. That changed in the 90s when, I traveled to England a lot of times, and there were bookshops, selling English books at that time, which was quite expensive because you had to pay even more money for those. So that changed a lot. And, you know, I've had some friends in the US which sent me stuff. So my English got a little better. I became a little more picky and a little more aware of, you know, how accurate things are supposed to be. So that made a change. I had the English versions, I read the English versions, and that helped me a lot. When reading the Silmarillion, my first reading was in English.
You always have to work with what you have.
Yeah.
With gnomes, it's actually kind of interesting because in the early writings of the Middle-earth mythology, gnomes actually refer to the Noldor, so there's kind of an interesting connection there.
I know, but I did not know back then. Because in Germany we have a similar word which would be gnome, and that would be related to dwarfs. That is not a one-to-one translation, but a gnome is more what we consider to be a dwarf, and therefore I use the word because I know it exists in English. I did not even check it in the dictionary. I just used it.
Yeah, I mean, Tolkien definitely had a habit of taking words and using them as his own, so.
Yeah,
it's definitely easy to mix those up.
Yeah, man, I totally understand you there. Like, I talk a lot here with the guys, so I speak a lot of English, but I still like sneak. You can tell that I use some words that are just like they work in Spanish, which is my native language, but then in English it sounds off and weird. But maybe someone else that speaks my same language can understand what I tried to say. And
I'm sure about
writing lyrics, that happens a lot as well. Like sometimes you're listening and you say, "Oh, I think I know what he tried to say here. He must speak this language."
Well, nowadays it's far easier because we're connected via internet, and our webmaster, who is American, has a very careful look on whatever we're releasing nowadays. So things like that would not happen. And I myself am more careful. But, it was the golden 80s and the, not so golden 90s, the beginning of the 90s. Yeah. So it was no problem at all. No one ever complained about. And, when we did songs like Lord of the Rings, I exchanged the words because I felt it would be more accurate to sing about the dwarfs, or when another English word like legacy, when I used it for the first time, I said legacy because it felt more natural for me.
Right.
And I failed to have our webmaster checking this before, and so it ended up on the album. Things like that happen. I mean, I'm German, and as you said, I've made the same experience, especially with native speakers. They are very tolerant.
Yeah, I'm thankful to you guys for that, for being tolerant.
I think most English speakers are monolingual, so it's just kind of amazing to us that all of you guys can speak, more than one language and have it be comprehensible to us.
Yeah, that might be, a privilege for us, growing up in such a world where, there is a language which you are supposed to be able to speak. And for you, it is the mother language. But for us, it is the second language. So we might have more difficulties in expressing ourselves sometimes. But on the other hand, as you said, we are, for most cases, capable of a second language, which is a blessing. And especially for me as a metal vocalist, because going back to the 80s one more time, if we were supposed to do German metal in German in the 80s, we would not exist anymore because no one was interested in a German metal band singing in German. That has changed due to Rammstein a little bit, but that was too late. Would have been too late for us because our music career started in the mid of the 80s, and we were totally dedicated to metal. So there was no question for us whether there was an option to sing in German or not. That was no discussion amongst the band members at no point. It was obvious we need to do that in English as good as we can, because all of our favorite bands they were singing in English. And I also think that it comforts metal music in particular more than, for example, German music. French does a good job, I have to say. I like some of the French metal bands from the 80s. That sounds quite good, but German is, for metal relations, quite difficult, I think.
I mean, it seems to be a case across European countries that most of the metal bands from them tend to sing in English. I mean, Italian bands, I've noticed, tend to mix it up more, whether they sing in English or Italian. But, I mean, it seems to be a trans-European thing.
Yeah. We're grown up with English-speaking bands, and that's the reason. I also agree. Italian, that would be a nice language to find out how that sounds, because it's a beautiful language, and a lot of operas have been, or maybe most of them, of the old operas, have been composed in Italian language, because it does the trick, and it probably would for metal music as well. But I can't speak any Italian, so there would be no option for me.
It'd be interesting to hear a future Blind Guardian song in German if that ever came up.
Well, I doubt that. We did some attempts with Harvest of Sorrow, actually. We did a French version. We did one Italian version and 2 different Spanish versions. My Spanish is a little better nowadays, I have to say. But, I mean, it's not good, but if someone translated it, I would be able to sing it in a proper way. I was not back then.
Right.
It sounds okay, I would say. The best version is the French version, because I did that in France. I was invited by our record company, and they rented a studio, and there was a native speaker, conducting me. And I have had French in school, so this one partly is quite good. It's called Moisson de Pain, as far as I remember. The Spanish one was called La Cosecha del Dolor, and Mies del Dolor was the other one. So, and Fruto del Buio was the Italian one. And that was the worst for me, even though I love the language, but, that was a total disaster.
Yeah, it's the thing with all those languages, like, they are really similar in some stuff, but when it comes to actually singing in all those languages, some phonemes are like really foreign to you. Like I studied German for a few years ago, and I have trouble with some things that you have to say, some sounds that you have to make that are just I never used them before, so I don't know how to make them. So like, how do you put your song or what? And when you're singing, that's even more difficult, because you have to, I'm singing this thing and I have to produce this sound while making the correct note, and it gets really complicated real fast.
Oh yes, yeah.
Then you have Tolkien going off and making his own languages, and studying so many on his own that for Old English, Old Norse, Finnish.
Yeah,
it's just amazing what he did with that.
Yeah, I said he's a linguistic genius, and that makes it so exciting. And sometimes I feel that every nation, every foreign language speaker, tries to make his universe his own by, trying to pronounce it his words as good as possible. And of course there are pundits who know the language exactly, and they know the Telerian dialect and this accent, blah blah blah. It is very impressive to see, and it just gives you an idea, for example, if we're talking about Morgoth, because it's not Morgoth, it is considered to be Morgoth, at least that's what I've been told. But, if I sang it in English, and I did on the album for most cases, I sing Morgoth, of course, because it's TH at the end. I would guess that this is the most suitable English way. So it doesn't matter too much.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, everyone in the Tolkien fan community just says Morgoth, so.
Yeah, and this just happened to us. We were talking last week, and I speaking in English, said the word Mordor like this, like in English, like pulling back on my rolling R's. Like I, as a Spanish speaker, would normally say Mordor.
Sounds great.
And that's supposed, and Ed told me here that that's how you're supposed to say it. And I was like translating to English. So I was saying Mordor, like with that soft R. And no, I don't have, I was saying it correctly. I shouldn't translate it.
And it sounds dangerous when you're saying it, you know?
Yeah, like, Mordor.
Yeah, exactly.
The Silmarillion even has that like guide to pronunciation in the back, hitting like the different vowel or consonant sounds, even like the DH, like in your username there, Ed.
Yeah. It's like, there are actually recordings of Tolkien, singing various songs and taking readings from his books. If you read his Sindarin, or if you listen to his Sindarin words, he really goes for those rolled R's.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah, I would guess so. I really would guess so. He had a definite idea about things, and he was so much into language and linguistic aspects in general. So I'm sure that he, played along with all the stuff, and a rolling R is, kind of tempting, especially in a world like Mordor. They do it in the movies as well, as far as I remember, that, and the rolling R is sort of old English as well. I mean, I would not be surprised to find it there a lot of times, and the Scottish certainly do it.
Yeah.
So many people know, these stories were in part sort of Tolkien's justification for the languages that he made. The languages and stories are deeply intertwined with each other, sort of grew with each other.
I think part of what makes the whole of his works so compelling, like to go deep and investigate, because there's more to this, and you go book after book into the Silmarillion and every part, because since you have all these languages said, like you can tell, okay, there's a whole world complete in this, because otherwise there wouldn't be a full language showed here.
Yeah,
it's what helps make it all more cohesive, and saying, okay, so we have these guys that speak this tongue and these guys that speak this other tongue, and then immediately I have two cultures that I want to investigate and see where they come from and how they interact with each other. And that's what's so great about all of this. Like, you want to go deep and investigate all of this, and then you find it that it's actually there. That's amazing.
I think it is very amazing, and I don't see that only on the language side, but also on the universal approach of his creation.
Yeah, for sure.
If we go back to the Silmarillion, then compare that with a lot of the Rings, you get an idea of the size, and this alone deserves all the respect Tolkien has gotten over the years. And the Silmarillion finished would have outperformed the Lord of the Rings by far, if you ask me.
I mean, Tolkien definitely thought of it as his prime work. It's sort of interesting because in the Lord of the Rings, it mentions like Húrin and Gondolin and so on. And at the time, that was all there was. There was just these hints that there was something more out there. And, it was only decades later that readers finally got Silmarillion and could read those stories. It's just kind of cool how that all builds up and interacts with each other.
Yeah, when I was showing a friend of mine the movies for the first time, you'll forgive me for talking about the movies, Ed. He was like really blown away by just like how like thought out the world was. It didn't feel like it was just being made up as it went along. It was like the whole point of Tolkien was he made like these languages, this world. He thought it all out on a level that I think is just so impressive.
I want to say he started writing these stories in 1917.
It was like right after World War I, wasn't it?
Yeah, like during World War I. And Hobbit wasn't published until 1937. That's quite some time.
Yeah.
Then you have Lord of the Rings quite a bit after that. He was still working on these stories pretty much up to his death.
And they say George R.R. Martin takes a long time to think about it.
I'm sure some people listening will have just found out just how old this stuff is. I know I was shocked by it when I was younger. I read Lord of the Rings when I was like 10 years old or something. My dad had it, and then around the time I'm not sure, like it was already 16 or 17 that I found out, hey, this came out like 60, 70 years ago or something like that, the Hobbit. And it's like, oh, man, was this written so long ago? Like it feels fresh and exciting and complete and everything. And I wouldn't have thought that it was something that to be considered old.
Yeah.
Well, but that also depends maybe on the versions you read, because I have old ones, and I can figure that it has been written some time ago. I would probably not guess that it's that old, but Christopher Tolkien worked a lot on it, to make it accurate, and he did not change things, but he brought them into a certain chronological order, and he cleansed the stuff as good as he could. I feel, of course it's old English in the way Tolkien is thinking in general, but the story is timeless, no doubt about that, but I figure I can sense that this is not written during the last 20 years or 30 years. I would guess if someone told me it has been written in the 60s, I would say, yeah, that might be, and maybe even the 70s. But, I feel that it's a little older in terms of, how some things are defined and, how the progression of the story goes. It's like Shakespeare. It still amazes people, but I can sense that it's not actually a new composition.
Yeah, you're right. You're right about that.
And in the writing of the style of the language, it's kind of dated. It's not super dated, but Tolkien was.
That's where I point out that I read it in Spanish, and then that's where some of that oldish English way of speaking might be lost. At least, probably that can be also from the version that I read, but I understand that it's written in a way that feels like, okay, this isn't, nobody speaks like this. Nobody writes like this currently. And in Spanish, I didn't really get that impression because there's not like the equivalent of old Spanish. It's not really used in Latin America as it is in Spain. So the translations don't really go that hard on it. Well, that's just my experience.
For me, it was kind of more interesting to see how the English version in general related to Old German.
Oh,
English and German, they have the same root. It's one language which gets closest in the nowadays Dutch language. Funny enough, but and Dutch comes from German because Dutch means Deutsch, and Deutsch is what we consider German. But the Dutch language gets closest to the origin, and so does some of the Scandinavian languages. And I found a lot of words. I cannot really figure one at the moment, which and the grammar, the position of words, which gets closer to regular nowadays German than it does to a regular grammar in English, when speaking. And like du hast is one of the old English explanations in there or terms he's using. And in Germany that would be du hast. So these words and these family roots, they are so closely related that sometimes for me the old English does make a deeper impact and a more logical relation than sometimes nowadays English.
It's also interesting because we were talking about Tolkien's music earlier, like songs that he put into the stories and such, and he would actually sort of revive, Old Norse forms of poetry and such, and especially for the Rohirrim. He didn't rely on sort of the rhyming schemes that are more popular, though he used those too. I'm totally blanking on the name of it, but he sort of took influence from how the Poetic Edda is written and such.
And you said there are groups that take the songs that he wrote in the books and have put their own music to them, correct?
Oh yeah, there's this project that happened, I think, in the mid-2000s called the Tolkien Ensemble. And basically they just took Tolkien's lyrics and, put them song, had opera singers and such sing them. It's really a great performance to listen to. I was actually kind of thinking that it might be cool to get like a metal Tolkien ensemble someday.
I heard about such music, but I think there's a Swedish group doing stuff like this.
I think they're Danish.
Or Danish? Oh, that might be true. I may even have the CD at home. I'm not sure if I ever listened to it, but I may have it. Do you recall a guy called Bo Hansson? He did a whole album called The Lord of the Rings.
I don't.
I do not know.
That is a 70s album. It's quite interesting music. It's, as far as I remember, it's instrumental music, but it also, I don't know how to explain the music. It's not jazz. It's experimental music, you can say, and even that fits completely. And you get an image of the story. So there are multiple ways, to get access to the Tolkien universes, and it's just a question which string has been played in you, or which string has been awakened.
And that comment just, it reminds me of how Tolkien viewed these things as, they weren't things that he was creating. He was discovering them. Like, Middle-earth exists outside of Tolkien.
Yeah. That defines a lot, and explains a lot. It is like exploring, exploring universes. It's more like finding out about things for your own, for yourself, and you get a better and better picture. Sometimes when I have to work on concepts here, it's a similar experience. Someone throws in a word or so, and out of this word, a universe can be created. And there is no real way to define how to get there. It's honestly, it's the way. The path. You just have to take it, and like the Hobbit. The road goes on. That's how it is. You just go out and you have to find out. And by going, you find out things, and you will see things and witness things which, have an impact on you, and you react on this impact. You just mentioned Tom Bombadil. That is, another perfect example for me, how Tolkien explored things, and, how he brought in interferences or himself into a story. Stephen King did that in The Dark Tower in a quite different way, because he appeared as Stephen King, but as an alternate Stephen King, and I like that Tom Bombadil aspect totally, because you have that universe in the universe, and this universe may belong more to him, but it's still a new creation.
And it's quite the enigma, but just have to say that listening to how you describe your approach to creating art and such, I definitely sense some sort of kindred spirit with Tolkien there.
Well, that would be nice. But I'm a fanboy, to be honest. And when talking to you, I just figure it again. That might have been, one of the reasons for the Nightfall in Middle-earth choice. With regard to the other two concepts, because when talking about the Lord of the Rings or the Silmarillion, and when digging into the stuff, I discovered that sensation in me. I also discovered that when creating music. So there certainly are similarities, but mainly I'm a fanboy.
Do you have a favorite Tolkien story?
Well, what's it called? Roverandom, I like.
Roverandom?
Yeah. And I also like, depending on how you look at it, I like his Arthurian approach, of that story. Mm-hmm. But I mainly focus to be honest, on the Lord of the Rings and the Silmarillion topic. So whatever he has written with regard to that, or what has been published, I try to read and to investigate. But as mentioned before as well, I'm not a nerd. I'm a fanboy, but I'm not a nerd.
Yeah. I mean, thankfully, Christopher Tolkien has done such a great job putting so much of his father's writings out there and, really explaining them.
Yeah, I mean, he seems to, be the one who is aware of how valuable the stuff is and how much appreciated it is by people to get different aspects of Tolkien's writing. I mean, just imagine most of it has been handwritten, as far as I know. He didn't even typewrite.
Definitely. And Tolkien had rather messy handwriting.
Yeah.
Christopher Tolkien has actually talked a bit about how much of a pain it was to really, dig through that and get something intelligible down.
But I can easily imagine he was a teacher. I mean, that alone, and how sophisticated he is. And I can just imagine that collecting the stuff and putting that into the right paper order is a nightmare.
Oh yeah, like it was just boxes and boxes of essays and notes on old newspapers, and really to get something like Silmarillion out in as short a time period as he did, it's really just amazing.
And you're dealing with complex languages and names too.
Yeah, and he tried to avoid mistakes, so he was revisiting things again. And Christopher Tolkien is doing the same, or has been doing the same things. He tried to get everything into a relation so people would understand. But and that is an accomplishment alone, I think.
And I mean, I think it speaks to how much he cared about it. That he's mentioned that he's had nightmares of his father basically criticizing what he did with Silmarillion, even though he did such a great job with it.
Yeah, that's for sure. Because especially the Silmarillion book itself, it feels pretty much untouched. Like the words are the words, and I think he even mentioned when he tried to bring it into a chronological or into a logical order.
Mm-hmm. I mean, in the foreword to it, he basically talks about this work is what it is, but Silmarillion is surely this evolving work, which he eventually published as the history of Middle Earth. I mean, I gotta ask, Into the Storm, where you have, of course, we are following the will of the One.
Yeah.
Is that referring to the Balrogs coming to rescue Morgoth?
That is his tribe or his pack, definitely just being there, but not only the evil ones, that is more related to everyone, because whatever they are doing, it is at the very end, in the will of Iluvatar, and that is what this line is related to.
Yeah, because the One refers, of course, to Iluvatar, but Morgoth also had sort of this thing of wanting to be God, wanting to be Eru, so he would also be referred to as the One.
Well, I mean, the One is a kind of legal and, of course, place-holding element. The One, for me, there was Iluvatar. That's for sure.
I thought it was interesting that you said that song was originally called Gollum Speaks. And I was thinking of it's him following the will of the One Ring, in a way.
We weren't that far at that point. It's just one of the reasons why Ungoliant appears like Gollum a little bit, and I could refer to that quite, precisely, because, everyone has, back then when the movies were not, in the cinemas, still had an idea how Gollum would sound, just because of, the books, and probably one or two not cartoons, what is it called?
The animated films?
The animated films, yeah, right, exactly. So having him as a role model, was quite easy gave quite easy access to Ungoliant, which, does not really have a voice, by anyone. Yeah. And I just, instead of making it Gollum-like, just, mean and, like two-faced, I tried to bring in a certain hollow size. But still, as said, Gollum was a pretty good role model for that particular place.
I mean, they're both definitely very creepy characters.
Yeah, they are. I mean, it's just this, emptiness of Ungoliant, which is so tempting. And by, having such a character, knowing that it grows bigger and stronger than Morgoth during this travel, leaves such a strong impression in the way of making that, I needed to somehow design something bigger or still quite different in comparison to Gollum. It needed some extra vibes, and I gave that with the second and third voice.
Even with Ungoliant's origin, no one really knows where she came from or what she is. One interesting theory is that she's sort of the result of Morgoth's discord in the music. But, right from the beginning, you get the sense that this character is not right.
Yeah, this character is not right, exactly. That's what it is. And something, which fears Morgoth must be, a nightmare. I cannot complain in another way. And having such being, is a privilege and a pleasure for any artist.
Yeah.
Yes, you play a wonderful giant spider.
Yeah, on the other hand, this drives Morgoth or Melkor into, a smaller position, which I also like, because that gives me room for desperation, which he feels as well, and I always loved that aspect, that there is something which really fears him.
I mean, one of the recurring motifs in Tolkien's work is that, the evil guys are ones who truly feel fear. Like Morgoth, with the duel with Fingolfin, Morgoth has to sort of be goaded out to fight him, even though he's a much more powerful being.
Yeah, true. But, he experienced fear a lot of times up to that point in the story. And with Fingolfin, I, on the other hand, thought the sarcastic aspect of, being hurt, but at the end still in a position to succeed, was more tempting for me there. But yeah, you're right. In general, these creatures, and that might be a fact in general, even evil creatures know fear.
It's sort of that desire to have power and hold on to things. That's part of where fear comes from.
Yeah.
One of our other members of the podcast would love us to talk to you about the song Time Stands Still. Where did the idea of time standing still while Fingolfin and Morgoth fought come from?
The Iron Hill is where this is supposed to happen. So
right.
I just felt that it is a very important moment, a changing situation. On one hand, there was that desperate battle lost already. Fingolfin rides in desperation, to, find the ultimate situation. And obviously this needed to happen in a, almost timeless frame. So time was supposed to stand still, because it is maybe not only one of the biggest accomplishments of Fingolfin, but such a valiant deed and bravery, that it needed to be featured with such impressive words. And
yeah.
I like to deal with time anyway. I'm the time guy.
At the edge of it, so to speak.
It's definitely a moment where, the eyes of the world were on that duel, even if not in a literal fashion.
Yeah, like you said, it's a key moment in time. I like that idea. One other song or interlude, I guess I want to ask about as we maybe wrap things up is, could you tell us about the recording of Lammoth, or Morgoth's big scream as he was fighting Ungoliant?
That was heavily inspired by the story itself, because it says there was such a scream. And the screenplay said scream. That's a desperate, definite scream, of pain. And the guy did. And obviously there was some ice breaking going on with it, because, it changes the shape of the world, or at least the shape of the ice. I needed that to be involved. And our engineer, Charlie Baufeind, who was in charge of the interludes and all these dialogue parts, he came up with the idea to distort the scream a little bit, so it became even more intense, and it totally does the trick. It doesn't need more.
Yeah, this was a scream that had a whole region named after it for quite some time after.
Yep.
It's got to be epic.
Yeah, because I think it would. I don't know how it was in the story, but did it stay in the region as well? Yeah. Was it still heard?
It was lingering.
Yeah, I think I have had that in mind, and an echo and whatever you need. It should have probably appeared at a later point again to make that even more obvious. But I haven't thought about that back then. It just comes into my mind right now, and that's too late.
I mean, I think it works well where it is. I mean, it's happens when Ungoliant attacks Morgoth, and he's screaming for help from his Balrogs.
Was that really screaming for help? I thought it was out of desperation.
Yeah, it was. He was in agony, but the result is that his Balrogs come in, teach Ungoliant some things about fire
with wings.
Oh my god.
Well, in one of the texts, it does say that Balrogs flew there, and some Wings defenders bring that up.
Yeah, see, that's how I relate to the story.
All the Tolkien says fly for run fast all the time.
I'm sorry, it's too much.
And these guys just love trolling me about wings. Like, yes, what was Gandalf's wingspan?
I never asked what Gandalf's wingspan was.
I did ask that.
Someone did.
Oh.
It was funny at the moment. We can agree. We can all agree that Balrogs can fly.
Yep.
I mean, one of the points is that Morgoth didn't have any flying servants until the War of Rathan and Calagon and the Winged Dragons showed up.
Maybe they can just fall with style. and we.
That's one way to put it.
Falling with style.
In the Lord of the Rings, at least one.
Maybe it's like the old Superman comics where he didn't actually fly; he just jumped.
He just jumped really high, yeah.
I mean, we definitely see the Balrog doing that in Moria. He basically leaped across a big chasm.
Okay, so we can all agree that Balrogs can jump really high and really far.
Yep.
It's a good compromise point.
That's a good compromise. That's the middle point we can all agree on.
Which brings up the question of, did the Balrogs, did they play basketball if they're such good at, jumping?
Their physical skills are limited, so basketball is no option for them.
Yeah,
okay.
That's true. We're having a great time. And I want to say again that we are really happy that you joined us for this really good time.
Yeah, definitely.
I appreciate your time, guys.
This was really a great talk. We don't want to keep you longer. It might be a bit late there.
Yeah, you're several hours ahead of us there.
It's 10:30 in the evening here.
Yeah, we're covering a lot of time zones here. It's 5:30 for me.
Yeah,
like tea time.
I'm out in Portland, Oregon at 1:30 p.m.
1:30. Oh, yeah, that's early, and it's Sunday.
Yeah.
You have a long day.
They have the whole. They still have all Sunday for them, and we're so
We're just
near
looking
Monday.
out for you guys.
We're so near Monday. It's not cool.
Time. What is time?
We're We're very close to Monday, yeah, and no one likes Mondays, that's for sure.
Not at all. No.
It doesn't make a difference here, you know. In the studio is all the same.
Yeah.
Well, Hansi, as we're wrapping up here, I think we would just like to turn the floor over to you. If you have any final words you'd like to say, anything you'd want to plug, you know, the floor is yours.
Yeah, great pleasure talking to you. What I can say is expect the next Blind Guardian album, which is going to be the orchestral album, which has some original Tolkien ties in terms of when we started composing it. We worked on it for more than 20 years now. It will not be Tolkien related in terms of lyrics, but the music has that strong language again. So people should check that out, and it will be surprising music. I'm sure you're going to like it. Have a nice evening and enjoy the rest of the week, guys.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks
Hansi.
for being here.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Can I ask one thing of you? Just one thing. Can you say for all of our listeners, just tell everyone to stay powerful?
Guys, enjoy the rest of the evening and stay powerful.
Thank you.
Oh my
Thanks so
God.
much.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. It was a great pleasure and great fun as well.